The moment Claire Holloway leaned close enough for her breath to tremble against my cheek and whispered, "Please kiss me," her mother dropped a porcelain teacup onto the dining room floor. It shattered between us like a warning. Her father rose so quickly that his chair struck the wall, and the sunlight pouring through the tall windows seemed to freeze every face in the room. I had known Claire for 11 months as my roommate, my closest friend, and the one person who could recognize my worst days before I spoke a word, but I had never expected her to ask me for a kiss in front of the two people whose approval she had spent her entire life trying to earn. Before I tell you why she did it and how that single moment changed all of us, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Sometimes the smallest act of courage can break years of silence, and sometimes the person standing beside us has been quietly saving us long before we understand what love truly means. Claire and I had become roommates by accident after both of our previous living arrangements fell apart during the same week. I was 29, working as an assistant photographer for a small real estate company in Portland, Maine, and still recovering from an engagement that had ended when my fiancée admitted she had never believed I would become successful enough for the life she wanted. Claire was 27 and taught music at an elementary school, though she rarely mentioned that she had once dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. We rented the second floor of an old blue house owned by a retired librarian named Mrs. Bellamy, who lived downstairs and filled the front garden with lavender. The apartment had crooked floors, unreliable heat, and a kitchen window that looked toward the harbor. It was not impressive, but it became the first place in years where either of us felt safe. Claire practiced piano on a worn electric keyboard near the window before leaving for school, and I edited photographs at the kitchen table while she hummed melodies under her breath. We shared groceries, repaired broken cabinet doors, and learned to recognize the different kinds of silence between us. There was the peaceful silence of early mornings, the exhausted silence after difficult workdays, and the heavier silence Claire carried whenever her parents called. Her parents, Richard and Mary Ann Holloway, lived in a large coastal home 2 towns away, surrounded by clipped hedges and white stone paths. Richard was a respected cardiologist who believed every life could be improved through discipline, planning, and the elimination of unnecessary risk. Mary Ann organized charity events and spoke with the polished certainty of someone who had learned to hide discomfort behind perfect manners. They loved Claire, but their love often felt like a contract she was constantly failing to fulfill. They had paid for private piano lessons, summer academies, and a prestigious conservatory program, expecting her to become the accomplished musician they could proudly introduce at formal dinners. When Claire developed severe performance anxiety during her second year at the conservatory and froze during an important recital, they treated it as a temporary weakness. When it happened again, they called it irresponsibility. Eventually, Claire left the program and chose teaching, believing that helping children discover music might heal what performing had broken inside her. Her parents considered the decision a surrender. Since then, every visit to their home became an examination of her salary, her ambitions, her appearance, and her unmarried life. I did not meet them until a bright Saturday in late spring, when Claire asked me to drive her to their house for lunch. Her hands shook as she fastened her seatbelt, although she tried to hide it by arranging the folds of her pale green dress. She explained that her parents wanted to discuss something important and that they had insisted she bring me because they were curious about the man sharing her apartment. I laughed gently and reminded her that we had separate bedrooms and a written lease, but she barely smiled. During the drive, sunlight flashed across the windshield and illuminated the faint scar near her thumb from a childhood piano accident. She rubbed it whenever she was anxious. I wanted to ask what she feared, but I already knew. Claire was not afraid that her parents disliked her choices. She was afraid they might be right about her. She had spent years believing that leaving the conservatory proved she was weak, and every criticism reopened that wound. By the time we reached the Holloway house, she was breathing too quickly. I placed my hand over hers and told her, quietly and without drama, that no one had the right to make her feel small for choosing a life that allowed her to breathe. The lunch began politely beneath a chandelier that scattered afternoon light over the long dining table. Mary Ann asked about my work, Richard questioned whether real estate photography could become a stable career, and Claire answered questions no one had directed at her. The meal looked beautiful but tasted like nothing because tension had settled over every plate. Then Richard announced the reason for the invitation. A former colleague's son named Preston Vale had recently returned from Boston to join a private medical practice nearby. He was accomplished, financially secure, and, according to Richard, interested in seeing Claire again. They had known each other briefly in high school, though Claire later told me Preston had once mocked her panic attacks and called her dramatic. Richard had already arranged for Preston to visit that afternoon. He said Claire needed stability, mature guidance, and a partner capable of encouraging her to reclaim her potential. Marianne added that teaching children was admirable but not a substitute for the meaningful career Claire had abandoned. Every word was spoken calmly, yet I watched Claire disappear inside herself. Her shoulders folded inward. Her eyes lowered. The woman who could patiently comfort a frightened child at school became a silent daughter again, trapped beneath the weight of expectations she had never chosen. That I tried to remain respectful, but Richard noticed my expression and asked whether I had something to contribute. I said Claire's work was meaningful because she had helped dozens of children find confidence through music, including a boy with selective mutism who had begun communicating by playing simple rhythms. Richard replied that good intentions did not erase wasted talent. Marianne said they only wanted their daughter to stop hiding from life. That sentence changed something in Claire. She looked toward me with tears gathering in her eyes, not because she expected me to rescue her, but because she was searching for proof that the life we shared was real. For months, our friendship had been growing into something neither of us dared to name. I had noticed it in the way she waited for me to return before eating dinner, the way my chest tightened when she fell asleep reading on the couch, and the way every future I imagined seemed to include her laughter somewhere in the background. Yet we had never crossed the boundary between friendship and love. We were both afraid that speaking the truth might destroy the safest home either of us had ever known. A black car pulled into the driveway shortly after 2 o'clock. Claire saw it through the window and understood that Preston had arrived. Richard straightened his jacket with satisfaction. Marianne began gathering the broken edges of the conversation as if preparing the room for a performance. Claire's breathing became shallow, and her fingers closed around mine beneath the table. Her father told her to compose herself, which only made the panic worse. Then, in one sudden motion, she stood and turned toward me. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a courage I had never seen before. She leaned close and whispered, "Please kiss me." I could have assumed she wanted to shock her parents or escape the meeting, but the way she looked at me carried no deception. It held fear, longing, and a silent question that had been waiting between us for months. I rose slowly, touched her cheek, and gave her enough time to change her mind. She did not. When I kissed her, it was gentle and brief, but it felt like the entire room shifted beneath our feet. Marianne's teacup slipped from her hand and shattered. Richard stood in outrage. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the future they had selected for her. Claire did not let go of my hand. With tears running freely down her face, she told her parents that she would not meet Preston, would not return to the conservatory, and would no longer accept a life designed to make them comfortable while slowly destroying her. Her voice trembled, but each sentence grew stronger. She explained that she loved teaching, that her students mattered, and that leaving professional performance had not been an act of cowardice. It had been the decision that kept her alive during a period when shame and anxiety had become almost unbearable. Marianne stared at her as though hearing the truth for the first time. Richard's anger hardened into disbelief. He accused me of influencing her and suggested that I had taken advantage of her vulnerability. Claire stepped between us before I could answer. She said I was the first person who had never asked her to prove her value. She admitted she did not yet know exactly what our kiss meant, but she knew it was more honest than every obedient smile she had given them for years. The confrontation ended without forgiveness. Richard opened the front door and told us to leave. Preston stood outside holding flowers, confused by the tension inside. Claire walked past him without explanation, her hand still locked around mine. The afternoon sun was painfully bright as we crossed the stone path. Once we reached the car, she collapsed into tears so intense that she could barely breathe. I held her beside the open passenger door while seabirds circled above the distant water. She apologized for pulling me into the conflict and feared she had ruined our friendship. I told her the kiss had not ruined anything, but I also refused to turn her desperation into a romantic promise she might later regret. I said I cared for her deeply and had for a long time, yet she deserved the chance to choose me freely, not as an escape from her parents. That answer seemed to hurt her at first, but then relief softened her face. We drove away without defining our relationship. The silence between us was no longer peaceful or heavy. It was honest. The weeks that followed were harder than either of us expected. Richard stopped calling. Marianne sent short messages about practical matters but avoided discussing what had happened. Claire struggled with guilt, and some mornings she stood outside her classroom wondering whether she had destroyed her family for nothing. I encouraged her to meet with a counselor, and she began addressing the anxiety she had carried since adolescence. She also returned to the piano, not for an audience or career, but for herself. On sunny afternoons, she played with the apartment windows open while neighborhood children listened from the sidewalk. I worked longer hours, eventually earning a chance to lead photography assignments rather than assist on them. We continued living as roommates, though our affection grew more visible in quiet ways. We held hands during walks. We sat closer on the couch. We spoke honestly about our past relationships and our fears. Claire confessed that she had wanted to kiss me long before the lunch but had been afraid I only saw her as someone who needed protection. I admitted that I had mistaken patience for cowardice because I was terrified of losing her. The unexpected turning point came in early June during the school's daytime music recital. Claire had organized a performance for her students in the auditorium, allowing each child to participate according to their comfort. Some played instruments, some sang in groups, and one little girl who had never spoken in front of a crowd held up illustrated cards while another student narrated her poem. Claire had invited her parents weeks earlier, though she did not expect them to come. 10 minutes before the recital began, Marianne appeared alone and sat in the final row. Claire saw her but continued preparing the children. During the performance, Marianne watched her daughter kneel beside nervous students, steady trembling hands, and celebrate every imperfect note as if it were beautiful. She saw children looking at Claire with trust, not admiration based on achievement, but the deeper trust given to someone who makes others feel safe. When the boy with selective mutism stepped forward and played a simple rhythm on a drum, then whispered one word into the microphone, the entire audience rose in applause. Marianne covered her mouth and cried. After the recital, she approached Claire in the bright school courtyard. There was no dramatic embrace at first. Marianne simply admitted that she had mistaken ambition for love and control for protection. She said she had been frightened by Claire's anxiety because she did not know how to fix it, so she pretended it could be defeated through pressure. She apologized for every time she had made her daughter feel that affection depended upon achievement. Claire listened with tears in her eyes and said forgiveness would take time, but she wanted to try. Marianne accepted that answer. Before leaving, she turned to me and thanked me for standing beside Claire without speaking for her. It was not complete reconciliation, but it was the first honest conversation they had shared in years. Richard remained distant until a health scare forced him to confront his own loneliness. One clear morning later that summer, he experienced chest pain while walking through his garden. The symptoms were caused by severe stress rather than a heart attack, but the incident frightened him. Claire visited him at the hospital during the afternoon despite everything that had happened. She did not demand an apology. She sat beside his bed and brought recordings of her students' recital. Richard watched them quietly, especially the moment the silent boy spoke. His expression changed when he realized that the career he had dismissed had given a child the courage to use his voice. He confessed that he had been proud of Claire's musical talent because it made him feel successful as a father, but he had never asked whether performing made her happy. He also admitted that seeing her kiss me had not truly angered him because of who I was. It had angered him because it proved she had created a life outside his control. Claire forgave him slowly, with boundaries rather than surrender. She told him love could remain in their family only if respect lived beside it. By autumn, our apartment above Mrs. Bellamy's house felt different. Claire and I were no longer pretending we were only friends, but we had built our relationship carefully, choosing honesty over urgency. Our first real date took place in daylight at a small cafe near the harbor, even though we already knew each other's habits, fears, and favorite meals. Months later, we returned to her parents' home for lunch. The broken teacup had been replaced, but Marianne had kept one small piece in a kitchen drawer as a reminder of the day their family's false perfection finally shattered. Richard asked about my photography without questioning its value. He asked Claire about her students and listened to the answer. Nothing was magically perfect, yet everyone at the table was trying, and sometimes trying is the most sincere form of love. Just before we left that afternoon, Claire stood beside me in the same place where she had once whispered out of fear. Sunlight filled the dining room again, but this time no one was trapped by it. She kissed me gently without asking, and her parents did not look away. That kiss was not an escape, a rebellion, or a plea for rescue. It was a choice made by a woman who had finally learned that her life belonged to her. The first kiss had changed everything because it exposed every hidden wound in the room. The second proved those wounds did not have to control the future. Please leave a meaningful comment about a moment when you had to choose your own truth, forgive someone who hurt you, or support a person who was learning to believe in themselves. Your words may remind someone in our community that courage does not always arrive loudly, sometimes it begins as a trembling whisper. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Claire once believed love had to be earned through perfection, but she discovered that real love does something far more powerful. It gives us the safety to become honest, the strength to set boundaries, and the hope to build a life where we are valued not for what we achieve, but for who we truly are.